everyone, good to have you back on my channel today, and you're welcome to another interesting tutorial where we'll be making this lovely dress. It's a short dress with an asymmetric flounce placement at the hem. Okay, so it's very easy to make and we're going to be very fast and straight to the point. Kindly click the subscribe button and ensure to turn on all notifications. Give the video a thumbs up and share with your loved ones. Let's start after this break. First, I've transferred my bodice pattern into this fresh piece of paper. As you can see, it has the bodice pattern up to this point, which is the hip line. Then I've also just made some extension to mark the length of the dress. Okay, because this dress has flounce or flare at the bottom, we're going to cut to the length where we want the bodice to stop before we now add the flounce to the bottom, if this makes sense. So as usual, this is my dimensions I'm going to be using, as you already know on my bodice pattern. Okay, this is my shoulder slants, this is my upper chest, this is my bust line, my waistline, and my hip line. Okay, so we're not doing much modifications on this. We already know how to draft our armhole and all that, as I've explained in the bodice pattern. So we're just going to go straight and modify this pattern to create the dress we're working with. Okay, so and to do this, we need to measure from our shoulder line to the length of the bodice of this dress. Okay, so the bodice will stop at 36 inches. All right, because the remaining part of the bodice is going to be a flare, and the full length of this dress is 42 inches. So I'm measuring out 36 for the actual length of the dress. Okay, so I'm measuring 36 and I've marked that at this point. Right, so what we'll do now is to create out that slanted part. Okay, that part that slants into the hip line, and it slants from the bottom to the hip line. So for this pattern, I have folded my paper. Okay, so my paper is actually on fold and I've drafted on both sides, right? So I'm spreading it like this, and I'm going to make the slant or the curve where I want the flounce to run through. So I've measured from the shoulder downwards about 26 inches, and I've measured as well from the shoulder on the other side to 36 inches. The full length of this dress is 42, so I'm stopping at 36, and the flounce is going to take the other 6 inches. Okay, so when we are cutting the flounce, we're going to cut 6 inches length flounce, and we're going to add our seam allowance to that. I hope this makes sense. So this is 36, so I'm going to now slant from this 36 point into the point where I marked 26 inches. Right, so I ended up making it 25 inches from the shoulder line. Okay, so 25 inches. Kindly ignore this other marking, is a mistake actually. So when I marked it, I found that it was not as curved as I wanted it to be, so I changed the point to 25 inches. Okay, so it's from the shoulder to the hip line at 25 inches, then at 36 on the other end, which is the point we want our flounce to be. Okay, so that's just what we have on this part of the dress. Then the back of the dress is going to just be a straight cut from the 36 inches. Okay, so from this 36 inches point, it's going to just flow straight to on the back of the dress. Okay, so that's how the back is going to look like, and this is going to be the front pattern. Right, so just impute our darts as you already know. So just measure the bust pan. That's from the center front, so measure 4.5 inches, as the bust pan is 9 inches. All right, so we're going to measure 1 inch below the bust line to form our apex. Okay, so this is our apex, and we're measuring 1 inch below our apex and 2 inches above our hip line. Okay, so that's how where we're going to place our darts, right? So it's 4.5 to the side and 1 inch below the apex. Okay, so I'm drawing this point just to create the dart. So the dart is going to be 1/2 inch on both sides. All these things have been explained on the bodice pattern, so I won't really bore you with so much details. I'll just mark them on, then we'll move on to cutting out and cutting on fabric. Okay, so that's it. Right, so our dart is done on the front part. So now I'll just cut this out. You can decide to add your seam allowance on this pattern before cutting out, or you just go ahead and cut. Then when you finish, you now cut. You will not add your allowance when cutting on fabric. Okay, so I'm just cutting directly how it is. Then I'll add my seam allowance while cutting on fabric. If you observed very well, you'll see that I made the one side of the neckline deeper than the other side. So this is actually the back pattern and this is the front pattern. Okay, so I just made it so that I can use one pattern paper for both front and back. So by the time you just fold at the middle, you have your front body, and on the other side you have your back. So that's another simple way of saving your paper. Okay, so with this now we'll go ahead to cut our back pattern first. Okay, so we'll place this on our fabric and cut the back pattern, right? So when we finish, we'll now cut through the slants before we cut the front pattern. I hope this makes sense. Okay, so I'm going ahead to cut my back pattern on fabric. So now I've cut out the back bodice. Okay, so I added 1 inch for my zip allowance at the back, and I added 1/2 inch on the neckline and on the shoulder line, around the armhole and on the sides. I've also added 1/2 inch seam allowance to the sides. Then at the bottom as well, I've added 1/2 inch. Okay, so now we'll just take our back bodies out, then we'll cut the front bodies. Okay, so we'll cut the front bodies. Now to cut this, as you know, we'll have to trim out the slants. Okay, we'll just cut out the slants so that we'll now use this to cut our front bodies. So we'll now place this on our fabric and cut the front pattern. Okay, so I've gone ahead to cut my patterns on fabric. Okay, so these are the 2 pieces of my back panel, right? And this is my front piece. Okay, I've cut this out as well, and I've added my seam allowance all round, right? I added 1/2 inch, okay, to the hem and 1 inch to the side. Then I've also gone ahead to cut the bottom extension. That's the point we slanted. Okay, so now we have to cut our flounce. To determine the length of flounce you're going to use for this project, you simply measure your hip circumference minus 5 inches. Okay, so if the hip circumference is 44, for example, we're going to take away 5 inches from that, so we'll have 39 inches. Now with that 39 inches, you just measure like from this point. Okay, we'll measure the slant. I hope you're seeing what I'm doing. So just measure this slant on this point. Okay, and I got 26 inches. Okay, so if you measure that 26 inches plus 39 inches, so we're going to have about 55 inches, right? That will be the length of our flounce. I mean the continuous length. Okay, so because the length of our dress is 42 inches, so working with a flounce of length of 6 inches, which is the remaining part of our 42 inches. So I've gone ahead to add 1 inch to the 6 inches, so I have 7 inches, right? So the length of the flounce we're working with now will be 7 inches flounce. Okay, if you've watched my video of how to make a flounce, then you should understand what I've done here. Okay, so what I'll just do now is to cut out the flounce, then we'll start making the dress. If you've not seen the video of the making of the flounce, I will link it in the description. Just have a look at it, then you understand what I've just done here. Okay, so I'll just cut out the flounce now. So just confirm that we have enough flounce for this project. Okay, we'll just measure around this point just to be sure we have enough flounce for the project length. Okay, so we have more than enough, right? We have more than enough of the flounce, so we'll just go ahead to sew our dress now. Right, so for the sewing parts, I've simply joined all the parts, as you can see, so I didn't want to bore you with sewing all of this. For the neckline, if you're going to use a fabric, if you're going to line your fabric, it's important to just line it before you start sewing up the flounce. Okay, so I used facing. I used another piece of the fabric to do the facing, and I used my hemming tape to stick that in place, as you can see on the neckline. So I've just done the fitting. I've shaped it to size. Okay, and I've attached my sleeves as well. Right, I've done all of that. Then at the back, I just made some basting stitch for where I'm going to put the invisible zipper. So that's basically what I've done here. Okay, then for this point, I joined to this point, then I left off 1 inch. Right, so I didn't sew that to the end. I just stopped off at 1 inch before the end. Then on this other side, I made it to the very bottom. Right, so now on this side as well, we're going to attach our remaining slanted piece. Okay, so what we're going to do is to sew it on this point. Okay, so we'll fix it the right way, but we're going to also stop like 1 inch before the very end. Right, so we're going to give 1 inch gap, then we'll start sewing to the end, but we're going to close it off at the bottom. Right, so when we finish, before we now start fixing the flounce, I'll show you how to go about doing the flounce as well. Okay, so let me just close up this point, then we'll continue with the flounce. So I've sewn up this point, as you can see, right, and I left 1 inch at the top and also at the bottom. Okay, so that's where we're going to close it up, right? So now we'll pin up our flounce before we sew. So we'll pin this up, right? So we'll leave out our seam allowance on the flounce as well. Okay, then we'll pin it from here. We're going to pin it all round. Okay, so this is how we're going to pin it. We'll start from the slanted point, we'll pin to that end, then we'll pin at the bottom as well, and pin all over to the other end. Okay, before we start sewing them. So just watch and see what I'm doing. I've done it all round, right? So that's our flounce, and that's how I've done to that point. Okay, and to that point, right? So now we'll sew on the flounce. Okay, we'll sew it on the dress like so, and go around to the other side as well. So I ended up loosening a bit of the bottom part. Okay, this slanted little piece, I loosened it by the side, just a little more. So the tip here is, if you're going to attach this slanted piece, just leave out about 8 inches or so. The length that will be enough to contain your flounce, and 1 more inch for allowance. Okay, that's the point. That's what you're going to leave out at this point. Okay, then so that by the time you finish with the flounce thing, you will now close up your side seam. I've sewn the flounce, as you can see. So I started off at this point and I've gone round, right, and I've gone like so, and to the other bits of the flounce. Okay, so that's what I've done now. Now what we need to do is to attach our slanted little piece to the main bodice. Okay, so to do this, we just flip your flounce over like so, okay, revealing the wrong side. Then you're going to attach that remaining slanted piece, okay, this part that is flying around, you're going to attach it and start sewing from that point. Okay, so you're going to use this tip and sew at the wrong side. So you fix it at this point, right, then you pin it and sew to the other side. Okay, so watch and see what I'm doing. So that's your wrong side and that's the sharp edge. So you pin it to the top one like so. Okay, so you pin that, then you sew it. You keep going, right? So you're going to sew it all the way to the end of this piece. Okay, you sew it all the way to this end, right? So you attach it to that end. Okay, so when you now get to this point, you will hem. You hem or overlock that bit, that remaining bit. Okay, so that's it. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I'll pin them properly, right? Pin that, pin all of that, and sew to that end. So I've sewn to that point. Okay, I've sewn to the bottom. Now we just close up the remaining part of the side. Okay, so we'll just turn it inside out, right? So we'll just align our flounce and then we're going to sew it. Okay, but before we sew this flounce, it's very important to overlock all our edges and as well hem the flounce. Attach your invisible zipper and the dress is ready. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate your time. Do have a lovely day. Bye.